It's week 7 of the NFL season, and here are my predictions for this week. But first, how did I do last week in my predictions? In week 6, in wins and losses, I went 12-3, and against the spreads, I went 10-5. And before getting into the video, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future uploads. Kicking off the week on Thursday Night Football, we have the 4-1 Steelers versus the 2-4 Bengals. The Steelers are coming off a 23-9 win over the Browns, where Aaron Rodgers went 21 of 30, 235 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then Jaylen Warren had 11 carries for 52 yards, and DK Metcalf had 4 receptions, 95 yards and a touchdown. And on defense, they had 6 sacks. Then for the Bengals, they're coming off a 27-18 loss against the Packers, and Joe Flacco played pretty good in this one, going 29 of 45, 219 yards and 2 touchdowns, and it was his first game of the season with no interceptions. Then Chase Brown had 42 yards rushing, and Jamar Chase had 10 receptions, 94 yards and a touchdown. But Trey Hendrickson did leave this game early with a hip injury and is listed questionable this week. I think this Bengals offense is going to be a lot better with Joe Flacco, but with how bad the Bengals defense is, and now without Trey Hendrickson, they're going to be even worse. So I have the Steelers winning and covering the 5.5 point spread. Then moving over to Sunday, we have another early morning London game with the 4-2 Rams versus the 4-2 Jaguars. The Rams are coming off a 17-3 win over the Ravens, and Matthew Stafford went 17 of 26, 181 yards and a touchdown. Then Kyren Williams had 50 yards rushing and a touchdown, and Tyler Higbee led them with 4 receptions, 40 yards and a touchdown. And on defense, Byron Young had 2 sacks, and now he's up to 7.5 on the season. But Puka Nacua did get injured in this game and is questionable this week. Then for the Jaguars, they're coming off a 20-12 loss against the Seahawks, and Trevor Lawrence went 27 of 42, 258 yards and 2 touchdowns, and they really couldn't run the ball in this game, having 19 carries for 59 yards. But Brian Thomas Jr. had a good game with 8 receptions, 90 yards and a touchdown. This should be a pretty close game, and the Jaguars are very familiar playing in London, but right now I think the Rams are still the better team, so I have the Rams winning and covering the 2.5 point spread. Then we had the 1-5 Dolphins versus the 1-5 Browns. The Dolphins are coming off a 29-27 loss against the Chargers, and late in the fourth quarter, Tua hit Darren Waller for a 7-yard touchdown to take a 27-26 lead, but the Chargers went right down the field and kicked a 33-yard field goal with 5 seconds left on the clock to take the lead 29-27. And overall, Tua had a bad game, going 21 of 32, 205 yards, a touchdown and 3 interceptions. Then Devon Achane had 128 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns, and Jalen Waddle had 6 receptions for 95 yards. Then in the Browns' loss against the Steelers, Dillon Gabriel went 29 of 52 with 221 yards and was sacked 6 times. And it's just crazy how the Browns had Dillon Gabriel in his second career start drop back 58 times, while only running the ball 17 times. But their rookie tight end Harold Fannin had a good game with 7 receptions and 81 yards, but their defense just didn't play good. They had 0 sacks this week, and now Myles Garrett has not had a sack in 3 straight games, and they just couldn't get a stop when they needed it. But going into this week, the Dolphins have allowed the 5th most points per game at 26, and they're allowing the most rushing yards per game at 168.5. So Quinshon Judkins should have a really big game, and maybe the Browns could score more than 17 points in a game this season. Even though their defense hasn't played great the last 2 weeks, they're still pretty good, so I have the Browns winning and covering the 2.5 point spread. Then we have the 2-4 Raiders versus the 3-3 Chiefs. The Raiders are coming off a 20-10 win over the Titans, where Geno Smith went 17 of 23, 174 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Then Ashton Genty had 75 yards rushing and a touchdown, and Trey Tucker had 5 receptions for 70 yards. And on defense, they had 6 sacks and an interception. Then for the Chiefs, they're coming off a 30-17 win over the Lions on Sunday Night Football, where Patrick Mahomes went 22 of 30, 257 yards and 3 touchdowns, while also running for 32 yards and a touchdown, and Travis Kelce led them with 6 receptions for 78 yards. And the Chiefs played much better in this game, and they're getting Rashee Rice back this week. The Chiefs are a much better team than the Raiders, and Geno Smith already has 10 interceptions on the season, so I have the Chiefs winning and covering the 12.5 point spread. Then the 4-2 Patriots versus the 1-5 Titans. The Patriots are coming off a 25-19 win over the Saints, and Drake May went 18 of 26, 261 yards and 3 touchdowns. And he's off to an amazing start this season with 1,500 yards passing, 10 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and is completing 73% of his passes. But they really couldn't run the ball much in this game, having 31 carries for 73 yards. But Kayshon Boutte had a really big game with 5 receptions, 93 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And in the Titans' loss against the Raiders, Cam Ward went 26 of 38, 222 yards, a touchdown and an interception, and was sacked 6 times, and Ward has already been sacked 25 times this season. Then the Titans also fired their head coach, so it's a real mess right now in Tennessee, and I had the Patriots winning and covering the 6.5 point spread. Then we have the 3-3 Panthers versus the 0-6 Jets. The Panthers are coming off a 30-27 win over the Cowboys, where Bryce Young went 17 of 25, 199 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Then Rico Dowdle had another massive game with 183 yards rushing and 4 receptions for 56 yards and a touchdown. And over his last 2 games, he's had 389 yards rushing and 473 all-purpose yards. And Tedarrell McMillan had a big game with his first 2 touchdowns of his career. Then for the Jets, they're coming off a 13-11 loss in London against the Broncos. Then Justin Fields went 9 of 17 for 45 yards and was sacked 9 times. Then Breece Hall had 59 yards rushing, and Josh Reynolds led the team with 3 receptions and 25 yards. And Garrett Wilson hyperextended his knee in this game, but he did avoid a major injury, but is likely to miss a few weeks. And all around, the Jets are just really bad this season. And the Panthers have a really good offense, so I have the Panthers winning and covering the 1.5 point spread. Then we had the 1-5 Saints versus the 3-2 Bears. In the Saints' loss against the Patriots, Spencer Rattler went 20 of 26 for 227 yards. And despite only winning 1 game this season, Spencer Rattler's been playing really well. He's completing 68.5% of his passes, and he has 1,200 yards, 6 touchdowns, and only 1 interception, and has ran for 140 yards. Then Chris Olave had a good game with 6 receptions and 98 yards. Then for the Bears, they're coming off a 25-24 win over the Commanders, and they won the game on a 38-yard walk-off field goal by Jake Moody. And he made 4 field goals in this game in his debut as a Bear. And overall, Caleb Williams went 17 of 29 with 252 yards and a touchdown. Then DeAndre Swift had 108 yards rushing and led the team with 2 receptions, 67 yards and a touchdown. And it's crazy, the Bears have won their last 2 games with the exact same score, 25-24. But now the Bears have won 3 games in a row, and Caleb Williams has been playing well. So I have the Bears winning and covering the 5.5 point spread. Then we had the 4-2 Eagles versus the 3-2 Vikings. The Eagles are coming off a 34-17 loss against the Giants, and Jalen Hurts went 24 of 33, 283 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Saquon Barkley had 58 yards rushing, and Dallas Goedert led them with 9 receptions, 110 yards, and a touchdown. Then for the Vikings, they're coming off their bye week, and in their last game, they won 21-17 against the Browns in London. Right now, J.J. McCarthy is still questionable, but they've been still playing good with Carson Wentz, and the last 2 weeks, the Eagles' offense has been really struggling, so I have the Vikings winning. Then we had the 5-1 Colts versus the 4-2 Chargers. The Colts are coming off a 31-27 win over the Cardinals, where Daniel Jones went 22 of 30, 212 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, while also running for 20 yards and a touchdown. Then Jonathan Taylor had another big game with 123 yards rushing and a touchdown, and Tyler Warren had 6 receptions, 63 yards, and a touchdown. But before that game, Anthony Richardson fractured his orbital bone while warming up in the locker room with a stretch band. So their rookie quarterback, Riley Leonard, will be their backup for now. Then in the Chargers win over the Dolphins, Justin Herbert went 29 of 38, 264 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then Kamani Vidal had 124 yards rushing, and finally Ladd McConkey had a big game with 7 receptions, 100 yards and a touchdown. And on defense, they had 2 sacks and 3 interceptions. I think this is going to be another really close game, and I could see this one going either way, but the Colts have just been so good this season, and I have them winning. Then we have the 2-4 Giants versus the 4-2 Broncos. In the Giants win over the Eagles, Jackson Dart went 17 of 25, 195 yards and a touchdown, while also rushing for 58 yards and a touchdown. And he's just the 3rd quarterback in NFL history to rush for at least 50 yards in his first 3 games. Then also Cam Scatterboo had a massive game with 98 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns, and Wan'Dale Robinson had 6 receptions, 84 yards and a touchdown. Then on defense, Brian Burns had 2 sacks, which puts him at 7 on the season. Then in the Broncos win over the Jets, Bo Nix went 19 of 30, 174 yards and a touchdown, but they really struggled running the ball in this game, with 26 carries for 78 yards, and Evan Ingram led the team with 5 receptions and 42 yards. But on defense, they had 9 sacks and held the Jets just to 82 yards and 8 first downs. So far, the Giants have looked really good with Jackson Dart, but this Broncos team has one of the best defenses in the NFL. They're giving up the 2nd least amount of yards per game this season. They lead the NFL in sacks with already 30, which is 10 more than 2nd place. And they're allowing just 15.8 points per game, which is 2nd best. So I have the Broncos winning, but I have the Giants covering the 6.5 point spread. Then we have the 3-1-1 Packers versus the 2-4 Cardinals. In the Packers win over the Bengals, Jordan Love went 19 of 26, 259 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Then Josh Jacobs had 93 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. Then Matthew Golden had 3 receptions for 86 yards. Then in the Cardinals' loss against the Colts, Jacoby Brissett went 27 of 44, 320 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Then Bam Knight had 34 yards rushing and a touchdown, and Zay Jones had 5 receptions for 79 yards. But Marvin Harrison Jr. did leave that game with a concussion and is questionable this week. So far, the Cardinals have been just very disappointing this season, and the Packers have been really good. So I have the Packers winning and covering the 6.5 point spread. Then we have the 3-3 Commanders versus the 2-3-1 Cowboys. In the Commanders' loss against the Bears, Jaden Daniels went 19 of 26, 211 yards, 3 touchdowns and 1 interception, while also running for 52 yards. And Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt had 61 yards rushing, and Chris Moore led them with 3 receptions, 46 yards and a touchdown. Then for the Cowboys, in their loss against the Panthers, Dak Prescott went 25 of 34, 261 yards and 3 touchdowns, but they're held just to 31 yards rushing on 1.6 yards per carry. But George Pickens had a really good game with 9 receptions, 168 yards and a touchdown. Right now the Cowboys have one of the best offenses in the NFL. They're averaging the most yards per game at 387 and are scoring the 3rd most points per game at 29.7, but they're also one of the worst defensive teams in the NFL. They're allowing an NFL most 411 yards per game and the 2nd most points per game at 30.7. So there should be a ton of yards in this game and should be pretty high scoring as well. But I have the Commanders winning and covering the 1.5 point spread. Then we have the 3-2 Falcons versus the 4-2 49ers. The Falcons are coming off a massive upset win, 24-14 over the Bills on Monday Night Football, and Michael Penix Jr. went 20 of 32 with 250 yards and a touchdown. Then Bijan Robinson had a massive game with 170 yards rushing and a touchdown, with that touchdown being for 81 yards, and also had 6 receptions for 68 yards. So he had a career high in yards from scrimmage this week with 238 yards, and that is now back-to-back games with a career high in yards. So Bijan's playing at a very high level right now. He already has 484 rushing yards and 338 receiving yards. Then Drake London also had a very good game with 10 receptions, 158 yards, and a touchdown. And on defense, they had 4 sacks and 2 interceptions. Then for the 49ers, they're coming off a 30-19 loss against the Buccaneers, where Mac Jones went 27 of 39, 347 yards, and 2 interceptions, while also being sacked 6 times. And Christian McCaffrey had 54 yards rushing and a touchdown, and 7 receptions for 57 yards. And Kendrick Bourne had another great game with 5 receptions and 142 yards. But they had another really big injury on defense, with Fred Warner fracturing and dislocating his ankle and is out for the season. So they're now without Nick Bosa and Fred Warner for the season, with even more injuries on the offense. But Brock Purdy is expected to come back this week. But with how many injuries the 49ers have right now, and having their best 2 defensive players out, I have the Falcons winning. Then moving over to Monday Night Football, we have another week with 2 games, and both of the games this week are really good. The first being the 5-1 Buccaneers versus the 4-2 Lions. The Buccaneers are coming off a 30-19 win over the 49ers, where Baker Mayfield continues to have a MVP type season, going 17 of 23, 256 yards and 2 touchdowns. And on the season, he's 4th in the NFL in passing yards with over 1,500 and has 12 touchdowns to just 1 interception and is completing 66% of his passes. Then Rashad White had a good game with 65 yards rushing and a touchdown, and Cameron Johnson had 4 receptions, 64 yards and a touchdown. And on defense, they had 6 sacks and 2 interceptions, but they're starting to deal with a lot more injuries. Bucky Irving is going to miss his 3rd straight game. Then Chris Godwin is also going to be out, and now Emeka Ibuka is likely to miss multiple weeks with his hamstring injury. But now Mike Evans is listed as questionable, and he could return to practice this week, but that doesn't necessarily mean he'll play this week. But it didn't matter last week with Baker. He was able to throw to anyone on the field. But for the Lions, they're coming off a tough loss against the Chiefs, and Jared Goff went 23 of 29, 203 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Jahmyr Gibbs had 65 yards rushing, and Jamison Williams had 6 receptions, 66 yards and a touchdown. But after this game, Brian Branch did get into a fight with Juju Smith-Schuster and is suspended a game, so they're down even more defenders, especially with Terrion Arnold, Brian Branch, and DJ Reed, and overall they have 12 defenders out this week. So with how good the Buccaneers have been playing this season, I have the Buccaneers winning. Then we have the 2-3 Texans versus the 4-2 Seahawks. The Texans are coming off their bye week, and in their last game in week 5, they beat the Ravens 44-10, and CJ Stroud's looking a lot better. He had 4 touchdown passes in that game and just 4 incompletions. So they've won 2 games in a row. They're coming off their bye week, and CJ Stroud's playing really well. But they're facing a really good Seahawks team. And in their win over the Jaguars, Sam Darnold went 16 of 27, 295 yards and 2 touchdowns, and they really struggled running the ball in this game, having 26 carries for 60 yards, which was just 2.3 yards per carry. But Jackson Smith and Jigba had a massive game with 8 receptions, 162 yards and a touchdown, and he now leads the NFL in receiving yards with 696, and now he's on pace for 1,972 yards. Then their defense also played very well, having 7 sacks, and holding the Jaguars to 273 yards. This is another game I could see going either way, but the Seahawks are at home, and they've been playing some really good ball. So I have the Seahawks winning and covering the 2.5 point spread. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Goodbye.